Different sessions today, quite a number of speakers mentioned the importance of the media generally in creating an enabling environment for the elections to be free and fair and democratic, and how media can really influence hugely on the ability of having a genuinely open debate, which is essential to inform people to then be able to make their choices in the elections. Unfortunately, in many of the countries we've been discussing today, this freedom of the media is not only there, but in some cases has been really shrinking quite substantially. And I think Turkey here perhaps is the most prominent example of this very rapid deterioration in overall standards of democratic governance, but in particular, I would say, the freedom of the media. We exchanged a few words during the coffee break, and I mentioned that I've been working on Turkey for the last 20 years, and really, even the last 10 years, it was really quite impressive how Turkey had a very vibrant civil society, still has to a large extent, but also a very large and strong independent media and independent press, which existed for many years and was very much part of the kind of political landscape in Turkey. In the last several years, particularly since 2014, and after the Gezi protests that we have observed, and after that the failed military coup in Turkey and the referendum on the presidential system, we have really seen a very rapid deterioration in the standards of independent media. So today, Freedom House qualifies Turkey as being not free. And a number of major organizations that are observing the state of the media and the press in various countries around the world really provide a very damning, I would say, assessment of the state of affairs in Turkey. I particularly would like to refer you to the Human Rights Watch report, which was published just at the end of last year, which really looks at a very forensic detail on the state of the press and media in Turkey. It's a 60-page long report, and it really documents kind of a very sad case of the pressure that the media and the press is experiencing in Turkey. I mean, there are they really talk about the 5 different major ways that the media today finds itself, and the press finds itself under pressure. We have seen, of course, a number of intimidation, physical intimidation and pressure put on the journalists in Turkey. That, of course, is also not new. Several journalists have been murdered in Turkey over the last 10 years. Hrant Dink, of course, representing the Armenian newspaper, was one of the very prominent examples, but many other journalists, particularly the Kurdish journalists, have also been suffering a lot of pressure and intimidations. Many have been in jail for many years, even without being formally charged with their crimes. Secondly, we have seen, of course, in the last several years, particularly over the last year, many media outlets and newspapers have been closed down as a result of the action by the government, being accused of cooperating with the coup plotters or being disloyal to the state. So we have at the moment about 169 media and publishing outlets which have been closed down, 169 just in the last couple of years. And today 148 journalists in Turkey are in jail, and that is, according to the statistics of the Human Rights Watch and the Freedom House, is more than in Russia, China, and a number of Central Asian countries combined. So it is really a very sad picture that we are experiencing today in Turkey. And at the same time, of course, media had played a very important role in making Turkey a more pluralist and democratic country for some time, and this role is no longer there. So we are going to have today a presentation from Karin Bergquist, who has been doing quite a number of missions to Turkey, assessing really the state of the media, particularly as a part of the observation mission, looking at the role that media played in the elections, right, in the referendum as well. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to the organizers, and thank you for staying to the audience. It's not so funny to be the last speaker, but anyway, I'm going to show a lot of photos, so you don't fall asleep maybe. I will not pretend to be a Turkey expert. I'm more an expert in Northern Africa. But I did 2 LTO missions in Turkey. That was in 2015 and 2017. So it was the parliamentary election in 2015, and it was the referendum here for extended presidential system in April 2017. I will be talking mostly about the last referendum to make it specific and not to jump from one to the other, but I will make small remarks about 15 as well. For the referendum, actually Erdogan, he invited the mission, which is, he didn't have to, because this is not usual for referendums, but he did so. To show the whole world we have nothing to hide, and that we can organize elections. And they sure had a lot of experience since they had many recent elections. And in 2017 we were 12 teams of long-term observers were spread throughout the country from 13 countries. With no short-term observers, because it was a limited election observation mission. I just show one picture from 2015, and I was based in Ankara in 2015. And maybe just to remind you, that was during the terror attacks in Ankara, killing more than 107 people. And we were actually on the spot. We were observing the peace demonstration, so it was quite challenging. There was a state of emergency who allowed blockage of media and violation of fundamental human rights. Of course, this led to reduced visibility for the opposition, and people, they voted for more security instead of democracy. And at that time we heard all the time that maybe Erdogan, he did not maybe support ISIS, but he did not prevent them from working on in Turkey as well. Since and Erdogan, he is more enemies with PKK than ISIS. That's what we heard all the time. But I will be talking about 2017, where me and my partner, we were based in the vast northeastern region with borders to Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. And we were circling around a lot, and which was, it was actually, okay, I have it somewhere, doesn't matter. It was, we had the most diverse, ethnically diverse area in the country, and we also had the most religious part. So it was quite an interesting place to be. And we also had to our southern part of our region, we had the Kurdish areas as well. Yeah, you explained about the restricted media landscape already. Now to the media tendencies. Well, all the channels, they were so similar that this assistant of our translator, the daughter of our translator, she said, well, there must be a problem with the remote control because they all look similar. So that was, of course, that was a tendency, a strong tendency, and the result, or the main picture, was that I would say 75% of the media, they showed the yes side, or they favored the yes side, and Erdogan, who spoke openly against Europe. He scolded the PKK, the FETÖ terrorists, and the OSCE observers. I will come back to that later. Of course, the opposition media had little space. There were threats and assaults towards journalists. Now I take a picture. I show you a picture of the. It's a small apparatus, which from it's a national television and radio, TRT, and we actually got a small gift. I have it in my home and I listen to the radio. It's of course it takes all the channels in the world, but it was funny to see. We were visiting, of course, their studios. I'll come back to that, but it was funny because when we had been visiting the national radio and television station, I suddenly noticed this small apparatus all over in the court. It was all over. So I said, wow, that was fascinating. I mean, TRT says all over in the Turkish institutions. Just very visible, no need to hide anything. Visiting media stations to get a picture of the media landscape. We actually had the biggest score of yes in the country. We also had the biggest score of no, which also tells of the really varied area. We observed the 4 biggest parties and the dissident no, the nationalistic MHP party. Now, what was the... I can show you, sorry, I'll just go through. The first one was... the biggest one was, of course, Erdogan visiting Erzurum. And that was amazing to see because they had all the resources possible, and that was obviously misuse of resources. He had a huge stage. They had, of course, hired musicians, concerts, everything. Helicopters flying around, huge security, military presence. Compared, of course, to some of the smaller ones. Sorry. Okay, I wanted to show another one. Maybe we come to that later. Anyway, the smallest one was here was actually the nationalist MHP leader, and that was quite fun because he could not even rent a place to have his campaign meeting. It was not allowed, so he had to rent a wedding hall somewhere near the border to Iran, and it was absurd. It was not easy to find. There were of course, no signs telling where people could go. So it's just to tell you how big differences there were. And but anyhow, this meeting was the most interesting, and he was greeted like a rock star, and people were so enthusiastic compared to the Erdogan meeting, where people were asked to go, forced to go almost. So there was a huge difference. And there again, you had the HDP leader who was in jail, completely absurd. I mean, one of the very important parties, being a member of parliament, he was in jail. So there you go. I mean, how can you make visibility if the leader is in jail? Of course they tried, but this is an example. This is an interesting example because they made postcards of him and another one, and it was actually illegal to give them around. So it was all kinds of limitations, which of course made it very, very difficult for the opposition to be visible at all. Yeah, and then just a few words about the minorities. Of course, well, in our areas we had a lot of minorities because we were close to the borders to 4 countries. But it was, as you can imagine, difficult for them again to be visible. We didn't hear many of these ethnic groups like the Turkmen, the Armenians, Alevi and Kurds. And the great ethnic diversity was not reflected in the political landscapes either. I mean, it was not so easy to see that those ethnic minorities belonged to those parties. It was not as we thought. For instance, well, Alevians and Kurds, they often support the HDP, which is the party close to the PKK. The left-wing party, which is close to PKK, but they are more moderate. They don't support an independent Kurdish area. They are more for like a decentralization, if you like. Yeah, but anyway, even the Kurds, they are divided, and for me it was interesting to see. I didn't know. We tend to think in our part of the world, well, all the Kurds, of course, they support this HDP or PKK, but no, they are in some areas more nationalistic than the nationals or than the right wing and extreme right wing, because there's been this assimilation policies for years. So that was quite interesting to see.
And there's also, of course, religious Kurds as well who support the government, because they don't support the more leftist
yeah.
Kurdish parties.
Yeah, so it was much more complex, the picture. Okay, this has been... it was just to show that some papers, well, unless you can read Kurdish, then it's just an example of a newspaper or some small newspapers in Artvin up near the Black Sea, which could actually allow to appear. And Artvin is a kind of leftist area, quite interesting. And also here you go, for the campaign you could both have Evet, which is yes, and Hayır, which is no. And it's a very pretty picture to take, because it was very rare that you could have both yes and no in the same picture, and actually in the same city also. There was a massive pressure for the yes side, and actually on E-Day you wouldn't see so much. I mean, it was quite regular. I'll come back to it. But the main thing is that there had been, of course, pressure on all kinds of important groups in society for a yes. And it goes from imams throughout the country. Erdogan had asked them for a meeting 2 weeks before, telling them he wants a yes. And we asked our translator to go down for the Friday prayer and translate simply to, and he went back telling that oh sorry, it was a she was quite good. She was actually a PhD and super good. She went back telling that they didn't say exactly go and vote yes, but they they said no voters were terrorists, and they actually promoted AKP slogans during their ceremonies. Yeah. So it was quite obvious. Another thing is that Erdogan had also told all the muftars, it's not religious persons, it's the ones, it's the local, what do you call it, municipal representative. Those are called the muftars. They were told also to have a yes. And they are quite important. They are the ones meeting the public. They are the ones deciding whether the students will get their grants, whether the peasants will get their support, whether the old people will get their pensions and so on. So that was quite massive, a way to do that. We also heard that a union for unskilled laborers, they only hired yes voters, and then they fired them afterwards. We also heard about huge kind of private employee companies. I don't know if you know them. Was late in the mention. I heard about them, that they are they're not state agencies, they're kind of private in between the state and big enterprises. They employ people, and they also had this role of only hiring yes voters. So it's quite massive, and also only yes voters. They got the big tenders and so on. So yeah, here is actually the photo of the mosque, the Friday prayer mosque. That was the place where we asked our assistant to translate. I missed something, doesn't matter. Here you have clear examples of this is this is actually in this is the massive yes campaign. You would see it all over the signs for yes, and here you have this is actually not allowed because this is a kind of bridge passage, and you would have many of these examples. Here it's in front of a mosque, and this is not allowed either. I mean, we were so here you have a university, big poster. So here you have a theater in a big square. Well, there you can discuss, of course, but again, it was a very biased and unbalanced campaign. Many ways of pressuring, withdrawal of licenses, public ads only to some newspapers. Some political parties pay for access, some less, and some not at all. Political measures, disconnection of channels from national satellites. Another way of discrimination was that, but this is an old tradition, but some of them are old traditions, that media persons or editors, heads of medias would show up to media for their weddings with wedding presents and so on. And it's part of tradition, but of course it plays a role in a campaign as well. And we heard it all over. If you just report facts, then there is no political comments, then there is no problem. But how can you do that during an election campaign? So, of course, we heard it all over. Self-censorship was the norm. And then after all this, is there still a need for fraud? on E-Day? Well, I would say until 5 o'clock, maybe not. But then they found out that it was actually either equal, yes and no, or it turned out that maybe the no side would win. So what to do? At around 5 o'clock, when the election was over, somebody was knocking on the door saying, "We have a new rule here." And we were just, what? The election is over. And the thing is that they just decided, that the Supreme Board of Election just decided that all the envelopes which had been invalidated because they didn't have the right stamps, they should be counted anyway. And this is just irregular. This is not supposed to be, but how could that help them? Well, they just got, it was a way to, I don't know how it worked, but apparently they gained 1.5 million votes more in a very, very short time. And all I've heard, they couldn't write it that directly in the final statement, but we heard that that was the way how they did it, because they were not supposed to count all these, and they could, you know, put more votes in during that period where they took those extra envelopes. So, yeah, the OSCE statement said that basically the election had been well administered, well organized, and it was peaceful on E-Day. But they also, of course, stressed all the pressures all the way around, which it was possible for them because we were there. I mean, the HOs were there all over the country, and we had done our work. So, yeah. I don't know. No, I cannot do it here. I would have shown you just after the tabulation how it looked like, but I had a small, it doesn't matter.
What is it, a film?
Yeah, it's a small film here, but it was just all the packages of the ballots after the tabulation. It was just fun. And a big photo of Atatürk, which apparently Erdogan, he really wants to yeah. Now you have another one who works here. This is an example of the media monitoring work of the OSCE election missions. Just to show you how it works. They have a team on every election mission. Now here they have assistants. They are actually measuring how much space do they have? How many centimeter in a newspaper? How much space do they get?
Can you explain to me what you're doing here? I'm monitoring the election process of the media, how the media outlets are talking about different actors.
Can you hear anything? No. Okay, so I just explain you. Oops. Okay, I have it somewhere. Where did it go? Okay, basically they are monitoring. They are monitoring 5 of the biggest television and radio stations. They are measuring how much space they get, how they are treated. Yeah, that is basically what they're doing for the analysis to complement our analysis in the field. And what the media team ended up stating was that all kinds of violations had taken place. Media laws had been put aside because they could do it in a legal way. They could refer to anti-terrorism. criminal code plus the press law. So there were also crackdown on media, closing down of opposition media. It was the Gülen supporters, it was the Dohan group, and the way they can do it is that, for instance, right now the Dohan group is under pressure for being sold, or they hire from the state. They actually they hire people to get them on board on the state media. Either they propose them bigger wages, or they kind of force them to change media. So they could do it in many ways. Then they also stated that the Supreme Board of Election was not independent. For instance, all these crackdown on media had not been investigated. And this law, for instance, occurring very late after the election itself, it's also very strange. That was authorized by SBE. And then there was a lot of threats. The program will be closed if you don't change that and that. So, I mean, it was so, especially I would say in 2015, it was so massive that actually an international media delegation came to Turkey to condemn what was going on. And in 2015 it was maybe even more strict on the media, because there had been a blockage after the terror bombing. So it was absurd to be there. They could not discuss. They could not even campaign in a normal way. Yeah.
Maybe leave a few minutes for discussion, because
yeah, I just want to show you one example here of we were visiting a TV station who was saying, well, of course we have debates, we have freedom of expression and so on. And then when he wanted us to show an example. He said, come this afternoon, we are having a debate on the local university. So we went there, very enthusiastic about this, and then there were only yes candidates invited. And then when the students were asking questions, I was looking around, and then I saw just beside me someone was asking questions. He had a small note. So they had been asked what to ask, and they knew exactly the answers. So it was completely orchestrated, so-called debate. Really strange. Yeah. Okay. No voter education. Somebody said it earlier. Or almost non-voter education about the 18 amendments to the Constitution. I mean, we're talking about a new Constitution of extended power to the President, and few people knew about what was going on. Attacks on party members. Yeah, now I'll go briefly if there is any heavy security environment. They actually stated the referendum did not live up to the European standards. The legal framework inadequate. Misuse of here again, you have a public building and they are promoting Erdogan and his prime minister. Yeah, I could go on.
Okay, thank you very much for giving us so much interesting information, and also, showing us of your pictures. So maybe let's open questions and answers, not necessarily just talking about this specific case of referendum, but maybe even more broadly, given that you have experience also from other regions. Yeah. Well, let's see if we have some questions from the audience. Anyone? question? Yes, please.
I was going to ask about the comments by the authorities against the observers, but I see your slide here,
Exactly,
so
that I just wanted to tell you. I mean, it was quite strange. I was called 1 week before the end of the mission. Karin, what have you been doing? You are on national television. Okay, I said, what's the problem? Well, there's a huge campaign going on against the mission. Now, this was actually late in the whole mission, in the process, and Erdogan started having doubts about our work and our position. And then suddenly the way he did was to create mistrust in the mission, and he made a campaign against the mission. So there was a television campaign. First you had Erdogan. He was kind of very angry against the mission. Then you had the OSCE logo and few maybe the statement or something like that. And then you had me, suddenly, and then a photo of PKK flag, suddenly. So it was really, really strange. There you had terror allegations connected to the observers, and you had everything mixed up. And then, okay, we analyzed it. First of all, how did it happen and what to do about it. How did it happen? I had one suspicion early on because during the campaign meetings, we are sometimes, we are asked to be in specific places, and sometimes we can go around, which is actually quite nice. And sometimes we are asked to observe from specific places. And at the meeting of Bilali, which was the former prime minister, we were asked to stay at the media stage. And I had this doubt, is this a good idea? And of course I thought they would be filming us, but we had no choice. And I'm not sure they did that because they wanted to film us. But it was for our security's sake, and it was actually, there was 1 million people or more. It was quite nice to be there and safe. But I was close to a row of cameras, so I knew they would be filming me, but I just hoped that they would not use it for bad purposes, and which they then ended up doing. And what to do about it? Well, we decided we had 1 week left. So we said, what could we do? We just said we will keep low profile. We said don't give any interviews. We're happy to leave the country in 1 week. So that was the end of that.
So adding on to that, actually, what you just said kind of confirmed that they've actually managed to intimidate the OSCE. Is that the conclusion you reached as well?
Well, good question. It depends how many were looking at that campaign and their conclusions. It's difficult to say. I think it was wise from the OSCE not to go out in the press and saying and doing, because that would have stirred up a lot of things. But of course, it is a way of.
You could have defended your own reputation. I mean,
yeah.
So you were kind of intimidated because of reputational risks, and by you I mean the OSCE itself was intimidated because of the reputational risks involved in this.
Yeah, it's a point of view. I've never tried it before. Maybe another time I would propose that we go out in the press, but they...
And deny the allegations.
Yeah. Anyway, that was not the decision of the media analyst. I was not, they had
Speaking to the
decisions.
institution, of course.
Yeah.
I think it's probably very difficult to fight, try to put your other point across when there is no independent outlet to be able to express your view. So I think you can, and I think OSCE did, as Karin described, didn't have to be there because referendums are usually not observed by the OSCE mission. So the fact that they were there and they were then being able to issue a statement, I think that was probably the most important one. Of course, we cannot be, too naive to think that the OSCE statement can, in fact, change, the political environment where there is such an overwhelming dominance of one particular, party or a particular player.
Definitely.
But I think the fact that there is a statement with the on-the-ground experience backing it up is already quite important. Maybe then, of course, the question is and I think that would be my question, what should the international community do about it? Because we have, of course, now enough evidence documented both by the election observers, but also, various, as I said, Human Rights Watch or, all the kind of watchdog organizations that are international PAN, observing the state of the media. And of course, they all come to the same conclusion, including, of course, the OSCE representative for the freedom of the media herself. She was also saying very clearly that the media is under pressure, journalists are in jail because of their professional activities, that there is, pressure, like Doğan Group, on particular owners of the media, to, censor the content. So the big question is now then what should be done about it? And I think that is where, the big, I think, limitation that the OSCE or the European Union for that matter as well. Turkey is still formally a candidate country for the EU membership. There is still accession process going on. As a part of this accession process, EU has to monitor the compliance with the Copenhagen criteria, freedom of the media being one of them. But it is really, unfortunately, the realpolitik which prevails, because the countries themselves are championing the human rights and the freedom of the media. They are not prepared for other political reasons, be it related to the migration crisis or other geopolitical reasons, to actually take real practical steps to be able to defend their values and their principles. And the only outlet so far that had been doing it is the European Court for Human Rights. And as you know, Turkey now for several years had been a champion, quote unquote, in quotation mark, in terms of the largest number of the cases being brought against Turkey in the European Court for Human Rights. But even that has not so far been very effective in trying to free the journalists. Yeah, so it is a challenge, so observers can only do that much, and the fact that they were there, I think, was already quite important. But it is, at the end of the day, up to the institutions themselves to take the steps.
And you could, perhaps the OSCE itself could just have defended its observers, because I don't remember any formal denial of these allegations from the OSCE itself. And this is kind of how the current government governs Turkey anyway. They create a controversy, they drown other noises, and then people usually are intimidated for reputational risks or otherwise. And they just stay put. I mean, the OSCE is such an institution that it can actually defend its own observers, I guess. But that wasn't really the case in Turkey at all, I think. And of course, the OSCE just was intimidated, and the next day Federica Mogherini just said we recognize the results. So I mean, maybe institutions like OSCE, given that it's the biggest intergovernmental institution out there, can at least safeguard the interests of its own. Again, I'm just talking to the institutions here.
Well, actually, yeah, we are an observer organization, so we observe and we write. This is actually the main, I think that was the conclusion from the mission, from the part of the mission, that's what we're going to do. And that was what they did, during, yeah.
But when you were accused, you deny.
Yeah. Sure.
Maybe just a small statement, because obviously we were involved in this from the headquarters, of course, and we did respond to the media complaints. Absolutely.
You
of course.
did?
This is
Yes.
the first time I hear it.
You did deny.
When questions were asked to us for our spokesperson, of course, we denied these things. We give a clear outline of what our mission was, what we should be doing, and what we will be doing. The important thing for us is the statement after the elections. That's the purpose for what we're there. I think if you read the statement, it's fairly clear and unequivocal, so I don't think there was any intimidation for OSCE per se. There's always an argument about how much to engage when certain comments are made in the media about an organisation or individuals. You sometimes give more fuel to it by responding in detail. But we had a quite clear media strategy to how to respond to this, and we were quite clear in just outlining what we were doing rather than what we were not doing.
Anyone have any other comments or maybe observations from other, places where the media has been playing a role of one way or the other in terms of influencing the election outcome and experiences? Yes, please.
Well, it's from Turkey, so I was living in Turkey during the election.
Which one? 15?
No, the recent one.
The referendum.
Yeah, the referendum. So I witnessed all of this, of course, and how biased it was. And it's really frustrating, of course. One thing that struck me is it's not just the amount of space that the opposition did not get, but also what is the content of that, and how the writings on both sides, whether it's so from the AKP side and also MSP, all the securitization of the language, and what I would wonder is maybe have you ever experienced anything like this in any other country in terms of securitization of the language used? Because we talked before earlier the sub-Saharan African case about countries where there's lots of conflict, and of course in Turkey there is a lot of conflict, there is a lot of terrorism as well. Not maybe from the people that Erdogan argues are terrorists, but there is terrorism. So in countries with a lot of conflicts, have you experienced this type, has it affected other missions in terms of the observers, for the election?
Well, yes, I come to remember Burundi in 2010, EU mission, and there was lots of hate speech due to the old conflict between the Hutus, and what are they called, Tutsi, and that was the case where it was extreme. I mean, among the missions I have observed, and they were actually they were doing a huge work, or they had been doing a lot of work before the election mission to try to make some kind of immediate synergy projects in order to avoid this media war almost during the campaign. But that was, it was a long time ago, but it just came to my mind,
Maybe to add, the referendums, again, of course, are very different from elections. In the referendums, almost all of them, the securitization is being used. Look at Brexit here. It wasn't securitization from the point of view of terrorism, from the point of view of migration, being kind of the key, or the buses, or the referendum which took place in Hungary, or, it tends to be diversion from the subject matter. You said very clearly that there wasn't very much of a debate about what is this constitutional changes are all about. People will not explain in detail what they're actually voting for, and I can say very similar things oftentimes. The Brexit is oftentimes mentioned as well. So I think in elections is a different story. I think if we talk about parliamentary elections in 2015 in Turkey, there was also, of course, quite a lot of this, security, because right before the elections, this kind of peace process with the Kurds collapsed, and many people said it was kind of a deliberate strategy to then present Erdogan and AK Party as the only credible, defender of security, and that did play a role in the elections. But in the referendum, I think it's, in a way, was expected very much. That this was, and it is remarkable in many ways that given the kind of all the instability and all the, things that Turkey was going through at that time, that it wasn't actually that effective, because its outcome still was very close to call, and there was still a lot of very credible doubts, because of all the changes last minute and with the rules, that, even in spite of all the pressure and all the kind of security concerns, there was a very substantial part, of probably more than half, that didn't want to vote for that change. So I think that, and the trouble, of course, for Turkish politics in that sense, that the CHP or other, HDP were not able to then convert the fact that almost 50% of the population were against into then mobilizing them, for other agenda, more constructive one, be it relations to democracy or economy, and they kind of continue to be very much marginalized. Of course, we are, approaching another election cycle. It would be very interesting to watch, what's going to happen there. But from your observation in 2015 Turkish election, I guess, did you feel that there was too much emphasis in the media and monitoring of the media on security issue?
Yeah, in 2015. Yeah, a lot after the terror bombs. Yeah, sure. And as I explained, there was an international media delegation coming to Turkey to condemning what was going on. They were all there, International Federation of Journalists, all of them. So it was really, really, serious situation for the media.
And even if we look, for example, talking about security at the Russian elections, President Putin's speech just 2 days ago, what actually was the main message. It was all this demonstration of the missiles flying and the submarines, and it is not really essentially about, the issue of, what people really are concerned about, falling living standards of healthcare, education. There was much more emphasis on security, because this is something which you can mobilize people very easily.
Yeah, and that reminds me again about 2015, that this media delegation, they stressed that from now on they would be focusing on security for journalists. That was, I think, some of you may follow what's going on in the media world. Now the security for journalists have gone down, of course, and all media organizations working for improving journalist conditions, they are now focusing on security issues.
Okay, let's see if there's any other final thoughts from anyone. No? Okay, well, let me pass on to organizers for the final concluding remarks.
Maybe we should give it a pause to the...
Oh. Yes.
Thank you so much for staying here for so long and being a part of this. I think it's been really interesting, and we've had a lot of great discussions covering a lot of regions and a lot of topics, and I hope that you enjoyed it all and that you learned something new and met someone interesting. Anything else to?
Well, thanks for coming and bearing with us for the entire day. We'll be joining, we'll be in the pub just around the corner afterwards, so if you'd like to join us, you're all more than welcome to do so.
And thank you for organizing it. It really was excellent discussion. Thank you. Is this going to be an annual event or how?
Inshallah.
Let's hope. So.